All right. And I'm muted. So many beautiful people here. Thank you all for coming. We thought it would be an appropriate place and time to announce something that we've sort of alluded to in our emails, and you probably heard some of us talk about in various ways, but you know, we did our best to meet kids where they were last summer. We dropped about 600 kits off all over the city, those young people built things while sitting in their homes and in shelters, and we did our best to engage them under difficult circumstances. This summer, we're going to do it the way we want to do it, in person. And I'm happy to share with you our plans to launch Beam Camp City. Beam Camp City on Governor's Island. Oops, you know what? I'm gonna stop again and make sure my sound is on, because I want to play a video. So all summer, we're going to invite young people from city-funded day camps and schools from all over the city to do what we've been doing at Beam Camp for 16 summers, collaborate together on a big project. And I'm so thrilled that the designer of that project is on the call this evening, Yi, who will also be the designer for the Beam Camp in New Hampshire project. We're going to be, the camp itself will be staffed by young people like Luz Marie, who we are currently working with in our apprenticeship program. They will be running a fairly large camp. As you can see, we're going to be in several different places in Governor's Island. Number one is our workshop, which is going to be our year-round home on Governor's Island. And number two is going to be our outdoor space, where we're going to build Yi's project, which is called, where is it? Constellation. It is a companion project to the one that we will be building in New Hampshire, which is called a universe. Constellation is 6 10-foot sound sculptures. The bells that you see on the branches will be manufactured by the campers who come to Beam Camp City 4 days a week, Tuesday through Friday. They'll make things, they'll learn how to play circle rules football, just like they would if they were at Beam Camp in New Hampshire. And every Friday, we will we will install one of the 7 constellation pieces in these locations at Governor's Island. So we're thrilled about it. We encourage everyone on the call to, if you know a school that will be doing a summer program, if you work with a community-based organization that will be doing a day camp, they are welcome to come, and they should just get in touch. That's the announcement.
Thank you, Brian.
All right.
Thank you very much. Okay, and with that, I'd like to introduce Tom Hatch. I'm gonna spotlight you, Tom. And there you are. Thanks so much for being with us, and congratulations on your just published book. We'd all love to hear, first, where does it come from, and why is Beam Center featured?
Well, thank you, Calvin, and thank you, everyone, Brian, Danny, all of you that are joining us today. It's really been exciting for Sarah and Jordan and I to have been able to, follow along with the Beam journey a little bit over the last few years. And I think really, Calvin, the answer to why Beam is in the book, both you and Brian just illustrated that. For one thing, it's the power of the work. It's the power of the experiences that you all have created in New Hampshire, in schools in Brooklyn, and now on Governor's Island. This is work that just inspires not only young people, but older people like me, and creates incredibly powerful learning experiences. Also, I think, Brian also highlighted another piece, which is these are not isolated experiences. You all at Beam have learned how to bring them out, make them visible, and connect them and make them available to other people so that they can support and connect with other programs, camps, and schools. And that's incredibly powerful. But Calvin, going back to what you said about the challenges that we're facing today, the systemic racism, the, continued inequitable opportunities, not just in terms of education, but in terms of outcomes more generally, the only way to change education and to change the society that we're in is to work together. And ultimately, the book tries to highlight some of the things that we can do right now to improve education and to make it more equitable and more effective. And that includes creating things like the Beam Camp and Governor's Island, but ultimately really transforming education so that students like Luz and Brianna have more opportunities to engage in these kinds of powerful learning experiences. That really takes a social movement. It takes connecting to not just you folks who are staffing Beam, but to all those who are on this call, who I think, many share the same goals in terms of transforming education ultimately. And just, the story I tell people about, concretely how Beam got in the book is, I met Brian and Danny. I met Danny first. We were at a conference at the Javits Center, and, you can see the passion. You could hear the examples. I knew just from talking to, Danny for 5 minutes that, Beam was engaged in the kinds of learning experiences that resonate with me and that I want to see more of, around the country and around the world. But honestly, I got a little concerned after I started talking to Danny and Brian a little bit afterwards. And they were telling me not only about the camp in New Hampshire and the summer school work and the after school work, but they also said, we're starting to work in these schools in Brooklyn. And they described their vision, which again was, of course, very powerful. But I'm somebody who spent 25 years working on school reform and seeing examples of individual schools or individual programs that were successful in one place, but then were never able to scale up or have a more expansive effect. And honestly, my advice at the time was, I wouldn't do that if I were you. Why don't you just concentrate? You spend your time in New Hampshire, the summers, you've got it figured out there, build on that. And Danny and Brian, were very nice about it. They acted like they were listening, they nodded, and then they completely ignored that advice and went on to demonstrate ways and really find ways to fit the powerful learning experiences they were creating in Beam, find ways to fit them into schools. And I really want to emphasize that. That's something that Jordan and I and Sarah have talked about in the book. It's not that they took over the entire school and made everything project-based learning. They found ways to fit into the conventional system and create opportunities for students to have much more powerful student-centered learning experiences than they had in other places. And they created what Sarah and Jordan and I in the book have called niches of possibility. And this is places within the school day where more radical and hands-on and student-centered learning or career-oriented learning can kind of take root and take hold. And the power for me of Beam is that not only have they now created those learning experiences outside of school, they're showing how to create them inside schools. And ultimately, I think the hope is that students and now staff like Brianna and Luz can have more and more of these experiences over time and create, real pathways into the futures that they want to create. And that's part of the reason why I'm so excited to have this opportunity to talk with Brianna and Luz and all of you. But I'm interested in hearing from Brianna and Luz about, maybe we'll start with you, Brianna, your perspective. What's it like to experience or learn in a Beam project in comparison to school?
Well, with school, with my experience with school, I never felt comfortable enough to even talk or share my opinion. But with Beam, I know my opinion is going to be heard. If it's not there at the moment, sometimes people will even talk to you about it later on. So it was heard and addressed. So that is good. I like that. School didn't give me that. And school was categorized in groups for me. I think I don't want to say for everyone, so let me just say for me, I feel like it was categorized in groups. You had to be in trouble or really, really smart. So, and I just always felt in between. So I don't know, I was really stay to myself. I wouldn't raise my hand. I would know the answer, but I'll be scared to say it. At Beam, I still do that a little bit. Well, in the beginning, I did do that, but then I got comfortable with just saying it and just being me. It got easier, I could say.
In school or in Beam?
At Beam.
Yeah.
In school, on the first day of school, they don't tell you, it's it's no guidelines. They don't feel welcoming. You just get a classroom to go to. That classroom has those rules right then and there. And once you leave that classroom, the rules could change. At Beam, you get told you don't get told. It comes to agreement. We all figure it out. It's you don't be rude to people. It's not the place. It's not the place for it. And it's established on the first day. And throughout the time, that's how it is.
Yeah, there's a real emphasis on relationships there that's crucial. What about you, Luz? What about your experience?
So for me, it's kind of the same as Brianna, but in a different way. Because using my color and my stuff, they put me in a spots where it was different. It was because of the language. I came to New York to US 5 years ago. No, well, 4 years and a half ago. And they always thought that I was a white girl that speak English, and everyone, everywhere I go, thought that I was born here. And if I said that I was Latina, they may think, oh, she's Latina, but she was born here. She's just their parents just are Latinos and stuff like that. So I was always categorized as someone that speaks English and always were the white girl and everywhere. When I got to Bean, I was super quiet because, as I said, I don't have the best English ever, but I can speak it. I can talk with everyone. So that didn't stop. At first it did stop me a little bit. I thought of not going anywhere with Bean because of my learning experience and stuff like that. So after a while, I get to know many people that help me improve, help me to look at myself and say, you can't do this. Something like language will not gonna define you, because you can learn even if you don't know that. Language and communicating with people, it's kind of like separate sometimes, because if you know how to communicate, you don't need a language for that. You can communicate with people. So I was teaching and being, and everything was so good that it's my first job too. And everything was good. Everything was working good. So I kept working with them, and I was like, it's cool and stuff. I'm good at it. And I cannot say like it's bad.
Luz, if I could jump in, when we were talking the first time we were sort of preparing for this, you and Brianna shared a very similar experience about the moment where you realized or discovered that you were going to be able to share your knowledge with younger kids. Could you describe, I would love to hear from each of you, and I have a reason for this, what that moment was.
So I can start. So for me, it was the moment everything was into computer, everything was online. I was working. For a moment, I went to my home country in summer last year. I was working with Ben in DR while everyone was working here. So I was giving my vacation but working at the same time. And I came back, and Bean has a little, I don't know, I don't remember what it was, but it was a hometown show and tell something. I don't remember the name, I'm sorry. But
Show and tell live on Instagram.
Yes.
Right.
So we were supposed to present there, and I wasn't being at that time. So I got so scared. Like I could tell that I was shaking, because it was my first time talking with somebody face to face or doing a live where I need to present myself. And I was like, oh my God, I can't do this. And it was a small animals, it called cartoons animals that we were doing. And I was supposed to present that. They would say, oh, that's so very easy to say, like to present. But for me, it was so difficult. And once I saw the people around me, I saw the help that they were giving me. I saw that even though if I get it wrong, they will help me. I was like, I can't do this. It doesn't matter. I will get into that. And after that moment, I feel that my life was like given to them. And I was okay presenting. I was okay doing the stuff around. And I would say, I feel that I'm part of it already. I go there like nothing. And everything is super, like everything goes and everything flew really good.
Thanks, Luz. Brianna, did you have a similar moment where you had to decide that you were going to make it work?
So I have the exact day. It was May 11, 2015. So if you want to go on Beam Sisters Instagram, you will see me, and that's the exact day, and that's the video. Calvin asked me, was I nervous? I kind of lied because I was on video. I said no, and I was. But when I got there, I couldn't be nervous. I thought it was an Uber ride from Beam Center to the school, and I had to just sit there and think. And I just had to hold it inside because I knew I had to talk to people. When I'm nervous, I stutter or talk really fast. I think I'm kind of talking fast, so I think I'm kind of nervous right now. And I couldn't do that day, and I didn't want to do it because Calvin was not there. And I did it. I got to the school. I started bringing all of my mycelium up the steps. Oh, we were doing this pet mycelium project. I don't want to talk too much about it just now. And they didn't know where they were sitting us at. They didn't have a table for us ready. And I would just stand there. They just had us going back and forth with the students. And I just had to like not be nervous, not show the apprentices that I was nervous, that we had this. If I could keep control, and we did it. It was a successful day. Really good. I think that was my first time at the school with all the apprentices like alone.
Yeah, I just want to say +1, Brianna. That was a huge moment for me too. Background information. We were partnering together to facilitate a whole apprenticeship around mushrooms. We were growing mushrooms, eating mushrooms, cooking mushrooms, blah, 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 mushrooms. And then we had double booked 2 special events at the same time, one in Manhattan, one in Brooklyn. And it was that freak out moment where I felt like I have to be in both places. And then I looked and I was like, oh, Brianna. That's why Brianna's here. And we basically, oh yeah, we split up there and it was a beautiful moment.
Calvin, I still have this.
Oh, that's the tincture we made.
I wanted to point, the reason that I love those 2 stories, because it illustrates something that, you know, when you talk to people like Tom and Jordan and Sarah, you know, they are really good at drawing your story for you know, from you and Danny and I. They would you know, they'd ask us questions and we would tell the story from the beginning, sometimes multiple times. But what we experienced is that in those conversations, we would learn about what we were doing. And what you know, and I'm sure Danny remembers this as well. In one of those conversations, Tom mentioned the notion of crystallizing experiences. And Danny and I just looked at each other and were like, crystallizing experiences. Yes, that's what we do. And I think of those stories as those crystallizing experiences. They were the moments where everything sort of came together. There was a moment of challenge and you just got it together and you made it happen and you grew in that moment. And I just wanted to point that out because it's not this book. We're so pleased to be in this book, but it's not. But for us, it was like going to school, and we didn't really start understanding what we were doing until we started talking to Tom, Jordan, and Sarah. So I wanted to point it out. And Calvin, I'll give it back to you.
Thanks. Yeah, Sarah and Jordan, I'd love to invite you into this conversation. You're both co-authors of the book. And Jordan, how about I start with you? Some of your research was embedding you in youth culture and youth community. You were working and hanging out alongside with youth. What did you learn during that research, and what are you learning? What did you learn while writing this book?
Yeah, so I mean, certainly I can't say it better than Brianna or Luz has already said it, but I think a lot of what we learned is that we as researchers and we as educators more have a responsibility to figure out our own things. In a related project, my dissertation work, I worked with a lot of youth who were in a culturally and linguistically affirmative environment. It was a place where immigrant youth were meant to succeed. Right? There's an educational model directly targeted to these kids. And I was working with kids who, like Brianna said, were considered struggling or at risk or having problems fitting into the school. And one of the ways was linguistically. These kids were not supposed to be what the school called proficient. It wasn't anything the school was doing, is just the way we've structured school is that they're not supposed to be, they're not speaking English the way that schools have decided one is educated and considered academically proficient. And most of my work was outside of schools. And one day, a few of the kids and I had decided to take a walk, and I was meeting with one of the teachers. And as I walk outside, the kids are just sitting out front and doing this freestyle rap where they're building off of each other, moving from English to Spanish to English to Spanish, back and forth, building off of each other in a way that was proficient beyond anything that no matter how good your teaching was, could have fit. Right? And it really made me think, like, what is it that we're doing here? That even in this affirmative place, we're not meeting these kids' needs. And meanwhile, they're not just sitting around waiting for us to figure things out. They're already engaged in these educational practices, right? They're picking up language and playing with it and using it. And all of the educational things they need are already present. They're doing them in their everyday lives. And I think that what we saw with Beam is not school trying to encroach on kids' lives, but really get out of the way and let these kids who are participating in it flourish in what they're already doing. And yeah, I'll pass it over to Sarah, but I think that's where I come in.
Thank you. Sarah, yeah, what about you? Can you talk a little bit about your work at Teachers College and your involvement with the book?
Sure. It was really great to interview and learn about Beam's work, interviewing Brian and Danny. And it was that sort of power of the creative, like, maker experience outside of schools that excited me, and thinking about these niches of sort of learning differently. So I'm leading a curriculum lab at Teachers College, and we're doing a lot of similar work with teachers and finding it's so important to have this sort of like non-sanctioned professional development space. But what happens when you get teachers together? And, you know, the past couple of weeks, we've just been playing with like pipe cleaners and popsicle sticks and clay and saying that's a really valuable experience, and going back into the classroom with so many more ideas for their own teaching. So I think it's also finding these niches, not only for students, that's also super important, but also for teachers. And I think it's really great to hear Brianna and Luz's experiences as teachers now, and sort of how you make that transition, and how you're also thinking about your identity in life as a teacher and where you're getting that inspiration from, and continuing to like have places to mess around and make mistakes and try something new.
Awesome. I love that you just reminded us that Luz and Brianna are teachers. It's taken me a long time to sort of reconsider what a teacher is. When I was working at Beam, I would say I'm a teacher, and then people would say, "Oh, so you're licensed?" And I'd say, "Well, no, not really, but I still teach." And so it seems like this book is really tipping the concept of education on its head, reconsidering what is a teacher, who are teachers, how do we learn, how do we teach, but also what is school? Does anyone feel like they're up to the task of telling us what is school? Why do we have school? And what is the role? Why education? What is education? Brian, I know you have an idea. Anyone?
Well, I
Go
do
ahead.
have a story that that I tell frequently, and I do believe is in the book, but it picks up on that directly. But some colleagues of mine, you know, this is 20 years ago, were doing a project called Practical Intelligence for School. And they were asking a series of students, I think these were fifth graders, about, you know, about their school experience and how they learn to navigate school and things like that. And my colleague told me, you know, with one girl, she was speaking to this fifth grader, and she got to the end of the interview, and the last question was, "Okay, so why do you go to school?" And this poor girl got this stricken look on her face, and she said, "But I thought you knew." And I think that's part of the problem. In a sense, school has grown up and to fulfill all kinds of different functions. But as Jordan is illustrating, and as Brianna and Luz have talked about, it doesn't really leave room or opportunity for students to define and youth to say what they want to do or why, or discover those possibilities. And so part of the challenge and what we're trying to do in the book is to remind people that education is about much more than schooling. And, you know, Jordan and Sarah and I are not saying there should be no school at all, but we need to make sure that school, maybe it's a specific purpose to help us learn academic skills, but then let's make sure that only takes up a small part of the day. So we talk about creating a condensed school day so that we can have room for the kinds of experiences that Brianna and Luz were talking about. and really not just by Beam, but many other organizations that can create those opportunities.
Can I just ask you to repeat what you just said? So you're condensing the school day, but right now we have extended day where students are experiencing more supports and services and they're being taught even more. What do you mean? Can you just help us here?
Yeah, so I mean, those are really good questions, but the default assumption seems to be that if we think students are not learning, they must need more school. And I think as the examples that we've been talking about have illustrated, there's all kinds of learning that's really important that's happening outside of school. So right now, lots of people are talking about learning loss, right? And it's a really dangerous way to talk about experiences over the last year that focuses just on the loss, really, of access to school for academic purposes. There have been a whole set of traumas and challenges related to well-being, social-emotional development, economics, family life. But we don't want to just, we want to think beyond academics, but we also want to recognize the resilience, the inventiveness, the creativity, the resilience that students and teachers and families have shown, and build on that. And our argument in the book is, instead of expanding the school day to have more and more focus on academics, we actually need to be much more effective and efficient at teaching our academics more equitably and effectively, and create more time and room for other kinds of learning to go on.
We couldn't agree more. Thanks, Tom. Thanks for saying that and making it so it seems so actionable. If we could only convince everyone to do it. I just wanted to go back to Luz and Brianna about to have them talk about what they have been working on with young people. I know, Brianna, you had the experience of working in person, and now you are working remotely as a facilitator. Luz, you're working remotely with young folks. Could you just tell us what that experience has been like and what kinds of things you are working on? Luz, do you want to start?
Yeah, of course I can. So I am currently working with Canva Kids, and we are designing projects. I got changed twice from a group because we made our project, we made the project and they do it and give them the materials that they need to use. But now we change and we are like doing things that we have at home and we do it ourselves. So one of the biggest projects that I like to do is the sign language one. Is something that most of the people couldn't know because sign language is a huge population here in New York. Like a lot of people knows ASL, and I teach that to many kids. I work with the internship, but I just work for a small week. But then that as the new group that is coming this year to work as a project leader. And we are just giving things, we are just teaching them how is the work. And me, because I'm a project leader, I just create projects for kids. And what we teach them is just simple stuff that they can use at home and they can recreate with them. They don't need just to throw it out because you can create something new from that. And that is most of the things that we do. We create a stuff, we can present a stuff. I don't have a sample of it right now. Okay. I'm sorry.
It's all right.
We do those things. And yeah, that's the thing.
Thanks, Luz. And Brianna, and what have you been working? Well, I want to make it clear that Brianna is not just a former participant of the apprenticeship and project leader program, but Brianna is now a facilitator and a teacher in multiple programs that we do at Beam Center. Brianna, what are you working on right now?
Apprentices or learning labs?
So, and what are you working on with the apprentices, and how are you doing it?
With the apprenticeship is remotely, and they're working on, the first project they've done was a light painting tool, so they could have did it they could have used, like, the concept was introduced to them with using a glove, but they could have used any object that they had around, or they could have made something else. It didn't have to be a glove. And they made light portraits with that. There was no coding or anything because they made it with buttons. Now they're making bells.
And the bells are as a preparation for
For the constellation.
Right, got it. Excellent.
Learning labs, we make like short projects because their learning labs is remotely, but the students are at Beam. So in between like their classes, they have like some of them have like 30-minute hour breaks. So we make like short projects. I actually have a list of the projects because I save them. So there's like the projects may sound a little like girly-ish, but there's mostly girls. So we made shirts. We made tutus, we made pillows, we made jewelry boxes. We made, we casted a letter. I think I learned this from Lizzie. And we did hot glue casting. So they made a letter and they put a little LED in and they made it like a little charm necklace. A Velcro alphabet board. We had some Velcro sheet. We had Velcro and we had like felt sheets, and it's a kindergartners and they needed help with their alphabets, and we just made like a 12. Oh yeah, it's 4 across, 3 down, so it's 12, and they can make 4 short words, 4 short letter words like that. We made bubbles, because they like science projects, they like to be scientists. Oh, we made lab coats out of Beam t-shirts, but they made bubbles and bubble wands. They became a scientist because they made an LED name tag, and that's when they became scientists, and they took it in the bathroom and we made a song. Oh, that is on Beam Instagram too. Yeah, I can check that out too.
You know, I'm glad that you brought up learning labs, because it actually sounds a lot like what Tom was talking about before. I'm not sure how many people on the call know, but learning labs is a program where families that cannot support having their young people be at home while they're doing remote learning for school, create environments where they can do that. So the kids that come here between 2nd grade and 8th grade, they have their calls on Zoom just like this, and then they work on projects with Brianna and Kayla and Gulfam, who is also another project leader. So it does exactly what Tom says. It condenses the learning into a fairly short time, and then the rest is exploring new things. Calvin, go ahead.
So I found a picture of what we did with the sign language and the internship that are doing, and there's the light painting over here. I don't know if you can see it very well, but it's the name of someone, and his name is Abib. And this is an A, this is a B, this is a I, A, and a D again. So that's what he did. And that's how he used the sign language practically.
So we are now running program remotely, which if you would have asked me a year and a half ago, could Beam Center be a remote program? I would have said absolutely not, because we need space, we need the tools, we need we need to be in space with one another. But Brianna and Luce, you are both engaging children, engaging teenagers remotely, and in some cases with projects like Luce Marie you just showed us, Brianna you were describing, where teens are learning how to create circuits and then do light paintings with delayed time exposures with their camera. And it's all happening in a remote environment. It's not in person. Can you talk, like, what are you learning about the remote environment? Do you think this is the future of education? What are the positives? What are the negatives?
Well, I can say some now because I just got off a apprenticeship call before this call. And the positives, they feel a little, it's like they feel a little comfortable because they're in their own space. The negatives, it's like when they're not so comfortable, we can't getting their cameras on, making it like comfortable was like the hard part in the beginning. But once they are, it's really good. I was about to say something else. I forgot. Shoot.
You can think about it.
All right.
Luz Marie, what about you?
So for me, as Brianna says, the positive thing is they're home. They can do everything from home. They can do stuff. They can be themselves. And the only thing that may be like, oh, well, we're not together. I cannot teach you, like, because it's really good when you have interactions with people that you're learning. So it's really good when you know, like, you see that person face to face and that person is teaching you stuff. You can learn it, you can catch it faster. And that would be the only negative thing. But with the kids that I'm working with, I can teach them anything and they will catch it really fast. They know what to do, they know how to do it. And it's really good because if you teach them in a certain way, they will get it. You just need to, when something gets like difficult, you just need to look for the way where you can learn, because you can teach the same thing just in a different way and people will learn stuff. And this is not so difficult as many people think that it will be. And your dog is beautiful.
You heard it here first.
Tom, Sarah, and Jordan, I'd like to introduce or ask you to sort of offer your thoughts. The future of education, now that we're in a space with remote learning that's totally transformed what it means to go to school. Can you talk about what you're learning or hearing in your research?
Sarah, do you want to pick up on a little bit what Brianna and Luz were just saying? Because I think it relates to the way that your work with teachers, and it made me feel like, wow, if teacher education programs were as successful in preparing folks to lead learning experiences as Brianna and Luz, we'd be in great shape.
Sure, and I was actually going to pick up on something Brianna and Luz, you both mentioned, was that in some ways, because people are in their homes, they're more comfortable and you're able to sort of experience some vulnerability with each other that maybe you don't experience immediately in person, where there's more of that sort of facade or you haven't built up the confidence yet. So it is actually something I've been really surprised through sort of creative making and engaging our senses on Zoom, thinking especially about sound or touch or materials and really personal connections. There's been some openings for a lot of vulnerability and being creative together. And I think that's been sort of a really neat part of, and totally unexpected part of learning together, being in a virtual community together with teachers in my case.
Jordan, what about you?
Yeah, I'm a little hesitant to just be contrarian, but I think a lot of us have gone through those cycles of wanting to throw virtual learning into the sun and never see it ever again. I'm nearing the end of a semester and really miss seeing people. And I agree with everything that's being said, but it's a little hard to feel it at the moment. I'm kind of like, you know, one of the things that we have talked about in the book and talking with other people is kind of what things like this new form of learning or our push against traditional school structures opens up as a risk. And I worry about how already present attacks on public education could only intensify through this. And I work at a university that is a public university that was already running a deficit. And I don't want to say they're using it as an excuse, but they are talking about how now we can just do a lot more online classes because you know what, it's a lot cheaper and it helps us save money and it helps us survive. And that's one of the things that we talk about in the book, is how there's a constant need to adapt and leverage and take the opportunities that are there. But I don't know, maybe it's just me talking through, I really miss seeing people in person at the moment, so.
But I think you're highlighting a really critical piece of the book. In the book, we talk about a number of principles of school improvement, and some of them come from 30 years of studying why things haven't worked. Some of them do come from things like the Beam experience. There are programs in Liberia and Lebanon that are really successful at getting kids back into school. We do have some lessons from things that have worked, but part of the message from the book is that we really have to look seriously at how hard it is to change schools and why it's so difficult, why we don't have more programs like Beam, why it isn't, why once Beam shows that it's successful, it can't suddenly scale across programs, across schools, across the city. And part of our argument in the book is we have to say schools and society are not designed this way. They're designed to be conservative. They're designed to allow some adaptation, but not that much, which in turn preserves the status quo. And that's why where the book ends is, we need to take these examples that inspire us and illustrate what's possible, but we also have to resolve, to work together, not just for this year, for 2 years, for 5 years. We have to resolve to work together for generations to change this. It doesn't mean that nothing will change for years, but that sometimes the really serious changes that we're after are going to take time, and we have to be willing to take that time.
Amen.
Thanks a lot, Tom. I think that's a really great place to end this conversation, or that part of the conversation. And Jordan, I'd also like to just thank you for offering that contrarian thought, because it's absolutely necessary to keep in the other possibilities as we're moving into the future of education, the innovation of education, the next thing of education. Okay, and with that, I'd love to welcome the audience that's been listening into the conversation. Audience members, do you have an experience from your own education that has been sitting with you that feels relevant to this conversation? Do you have a question for any of our panelists and guests? We'd love to hear it. Chat is okay too. Thanks, Brian. Thanks for the reminder.
I will share something and I'll ask a question if you hear me well. Hello, my name is Marisol. I work and collaborate with Beam Center youth and staff. And actually, like what you were sharing, Jordan, Sarah, Luz Mari, Brianna, Tom, in relationship to like the digital spaces and the in-person, or like the remote learning / digital spaces, like it makes me wonder how, if in the future, which is now in a way, we can create the spaces in which we can involve more of the youth who navigate these spaces. And I'm sorry, I get nervous when I'm talking in front of people that I don't know. So let me start again. So one of the things we realized, so we run a program at Beam Center that it's called Digital Futures, and it's how Beam is developing its own research practice in connection of how youth actually engage in digital spaces, in online spaces. But something that we realized in time, even though youth was the one who chose and picked the topics that they wanted to focus, is that there were some limitations in the sense that us as adults that engage on these online spaces based on a certain language access or demographics, age ranges, our perspective, our understanding of these spaces, it's different from what actually the youth experience in a day-to-day. So we realize that even though we try to focus and emphasize everything on the youth experience based on this perspective of youth participatory action research, we realize now, a year after, that still we had some limitations. So in your perspective, based on what you know from Beam Center, but based on what you know from other probably organizations, schools, what are the best practices, or what have you seen that allows for staff to engage in more meaningful ways youth, children, in their planning, in their creation of curriculum practices? Hope that was clearer.
Yeah, Jordan, do you want to pick that up? Sort of how to engage youth and youth perspectives?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, that's a great question. And after being in education for 13 years and spending 2 years working with 9 kids in a really close setting, I kind of don't have an answer. I think one way is to, it's a bit generic, but just say, listen to what kids are already doing, right? I don't think that we can say, like, here are the best practices that we're going to implement, here's a curriculum we're going to do, but build on, much more radical version of being responsive to what they're already doing. Kids' lives and interests are going to dictate what the best practices are. And that's always going to change. And I think as a few folks have said it here, that seeing kids not as learners, but as intellectuals, as teachers, is really the place to start. And then allowing projects and practices to emerge along the way.
And Marisol, I thought it was really, to me, the sign that you're already listening is that you recognize the challenge, right? And I don't think there's any way to avoid that, but it's to be listening and open to recognizing, oh, I thought this, but no, and how to get that perspective all the time. That's what I thought was so fascinating to hear from Brianna and Luz, who are creating these experiences. Nobody has to tell them, exactly how to do it. It's part of listening and being able to build on what's there, but it takes a lot to listen.
We have a question in the chat from Anita Merck. This seems like a perfect time for this book. How do we take advantage of this collective pandemic experience to help really open up this perspective to shift the entrenched system you mentioned, Tom?
Yeah, really good question. And I think despite the challenges, there are some opportunities here. So you hear lots of people asking this question: what if it's possible now to reimagine education in schools? And kind of with Jordan's contrarian perspective, when I hear people say that, I also want people to ask us a related question, which is, maybe this is time to reimagine things, but maybe it's not. Because I think what people are forgetting is that conditions changed during the pandemic. We're hoping that many of those conditions will go back, because there was a lot of, terrible stuff that we want to be able to get out of our houses. We want people to be safe and healthy. And, many of those conditions were the things that created the changes. So we might have a glimpse of what's possible, but we're going to go back where many of the conditions that have supported schooling as it's always been are going to be in place. And that's why I think, to your point, is sort of how do we take advantage of our collective experience? I think it's really part of what we talk about in the book is taking a community organizing perspective to this. And that all begins with developing relationships, listening to one another, as we were talking about, and finding out where our common interests are. Not trying to do everything at once, but let's find out what our experiences have been and what are those things that we think we can and we want to take forward and work on that together. And to me, what Beam is doing is already, moving in that direction.
Thanks for that question, Anita. Tom, I think I want to just push a little bit more. New York City is one of the most segregated school districts in the United States of America. And some people have a lot of power over where their children go to school. Some people don't have the time or the energy. What are your thoughts on that? How do we navigate that system? How do we change that system? Just throwing that out there.
These are the great and fundamental questions that can't and shouldn't be answered by one person, but we should engage them, absolutely, everybody individually and collectively. But again, in the book, there's this really difficult paradox, which is I think we cannot fundamentally change the education system until society changes. As long as there is segregation in housing and economics, we're not going to suddenly have, equality, equity in education. But on the other hand, we're never going to address those problems of segregation and economics if we're not willing to take the steps that we can in the education system. And so part of it is just breaking down those problems and tackling them, one by one, as concretely and practically as we can. So that may be with the 9th grade, the high school admissions test to the specialized schools. It might be, in terms of the way that students get into schools, even in middle school or neighborhood schools. But what we talk about in the book is identifying high leverage problems. And that is, those are problems that many of us recognize as problems. That we have some capacity to address in relatively short periods of time, and that can help us to build the capacity in the constituency for further efforts. So the question is, so tracking is an example. Tracking in schools is an example of segregating students. We have seen many examples of how that tracking can be addressed, and that can be a high leverage problem that we can solve in some communities. The trick is to recognize that's only a small part of the problem. It's a small step, but it has to be part of the long-term, work on these larger problems. And we can't say it's intractable. We can't say these are not problems we can work, we can't address right now. We have to say these are problems we will address. It just may take some time.
Thanks. I want to just say touche to one person being asked to offer the answer. Though I do have a thought, and I think Beam Center for me has been an example of how to change that system by bringing children and teenagers together in collaboration radically with people from around the world, making crazy, weird things that require everyone to sort of learn something new. But Luz Marie has just raised her hand.
Yeah, I want to add on that to where I remember when I started to be a project leader working with kids. I remember someone asked me, can you translate this? And we would do a slice for kids that speak Spanish, because there's a huge, there's a large community in New York that speaks Spanish, and many of them are out. They don't get to work or do stuff just because of the language. And I remember I feel so good because I was translating slices for kids, even though there weren't a lot of kids that need those slices. I was so proud of being translating those things for kids and doing those things, because I was working with another kid from my school that we were translating, and we were doing this and that. So the kids could, even though you don't know a language, you still can learn, because there's nothing that can stop you. And that's one of the things that helped me to decide what type of things I want to do when I grow up and what career I want to I am into.
Thanks, Luz. Cynthia, I see your hand up. I'd love to invite you into the conversation.
Hi, good evening, everyone. I'm Cynthia from the Dock Street School in Dumbo, a Title I middle school, and I just wanted to share my school experience with Beam. The kids, it was a remarkable experience, and I like that word, like crystallizing, because it was for a lot of our students, where they were able to interact with kids who look like them. Well, not kids, but older, young adults and high school students. I think a lot of them were high school students. And I remember like the kids it was twice, I think once or twice a week, they were like looking forward to it. And when it ended, they were like, can it continue? And now some of those students are in the top high schools in Brooklyn, including a lot of specialized high schools. Like we got kids into Stuyvesant and Brooklyn Tech, and now they're able to experience being in a robotics team, which we didn't have that at Dock Street, but with the partnership with Beam, we were able to like give them those hands-on projects. So just want to thank you. And I'm looking forward to getting that book because I'm also on CEC 13. And I think now is the time to demand more from the DOE. Thank you.
Thank you, Cynthia. Just to reiterate, Dock Street is a school based in Dumbo. Beam Center project leaders worked there with their middle school after school program last year up until the pandemic changed that. But every time I visited, it was pretty spectacular. Thanks. We have time for probably one more question. Anybody like to offer a question or say a thought?
Mike is asking, how about federal funding versus hyper-local funding? You want to say more about that? I know, Mike, you're recovering from your second dose, so if you don't want to talk, understood.
Yeah, no, thanks, Brian. Thanks, Brian. I'm very influenced by things that I watch and see in documentaries. So a show that I really enjoy is United Shades of America, and he went to the worst neighborhoods of Chicago, and the discussion was about school districts being funded by local taxes, state taxes versus an equal pot to be spread around. I know this is a little bit more macro than what we're talking about, but that's like something that's been on my mind. And the only other thing is, and it was mentioned here earlier, is just getting to know the students better. Like, you know, in business, we have personality tests, whether it's Myers-Briggs or the Colby test to match people up and figure out how to hire. I wonder if there's something like that to get kids to, you know, kind of self-identify and then put them in groups that make more sense for whether they're an audio learner or a visual learner.
There are some tests, and I've worked with the developer of the theory of multiple intelligence, which, you know, looks at a wide range of abilities and, you know, thinks about how to assess those. But I think you hit it right on the head in the first place, which is there just need to be more opportunities in schools for teachers and students to get to know one another in much deeper ways. And if there are assessments or tools that can help with that, that's great. But it's much more creating the time and opportunity for people like Brianna and Luz to develop the relationships with their students so that they can get a sense of what might be possible, and also open up room for those kinds of crystallizing learning experiences. But I also think that it's important to think about both federal funding and hyperlocal funding. Part of what we're arguing in the book is that actually we need solutions at every level. And that, you know, even in countries like, you know, Norway, Finland, and Singapore that provide a lot of national and systemic support for education, which I think is crucial, and not just education, but also health, you know, housing, you know, all kinds of things. But even in those places, there's need for, you know, really local inventions, adaptations that can make these, you know, powerful learning, you know, bring powerful learning experiences forward. And so it's both local and federal and national in that sense.
Mm.
Yes, and this is just the beginning of a much greater conversation that is taking place across the nation I want to thank our panelists today for being here. Tom, Jordan, and Sarah, who wrote The Education We Need for a Future We Can't Predict, and Brianna, Luz Marie, and Brian, who are all staff members at Beam Center. Such a pleasure. I feel like we could just go on and on and on. And I hope everybody here tonight feels a little more hopeful about the future that we are so uncertain about. And I encourage you to get involved in education, get involved in youth development, if only to invest, share, spread the word, encourage the youth that you see in your community, and believe in them again and again and again. Thank you. And I hope you are safe and well wherever you are.
Thank you, everyone. Thanks for coming. More big announcements on the way. Going to be a big summer. Thanks, Tom. Thanks, Jordan. Thanks, Sarah.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
you.
Beautiful job.
Really fascinating.
Great stuff.
Wow.
Just thanks. It's so great to see everybody here.
So good.
Yeah. And as always, no one wants to leave. Sai Khan's here, though.
I saw that. Sai knows a good community when he sees one.